and strategically, what is the Ivan Korchak nightmare list?
There's nothing that is nightmare for me, but I don't sleep well. I haven't been sleeping well for quite some time, as I'm getting old. But no, in very recent days, by the way, when I woke up in the middle of the night, the issue that came to my mind was whether guys at Globsega are crazy enough to organize this in person. And that was 2 weeks before that. And then a week before this, we, the government, declared state of emergency. So then, since then, I couldn't sleep alone, imagining that we would meet here in person. But more seriously, there are 2 or 3 things that are very important, and our minds are full with that. Number one, it's COVID. It's COVID. And before getting here in the room, I realize again, because the news of today is a new record of those who have been tested positive for COVID in this country. Friday, extraordinary session of government. Today, extraordinary session of pandemic commission. Tomorrow, extraordinary session of crisis management board, what that is, Monday, and so on and so on. So everything is overshadowed by this. And by the way, as I realize that numbers unfortunately are still growing, that brings me back to summer, where we thought that the most important issue that will entertain us in a way in coming months would be economic recovery, which is true, but looking at the pandemic situation, come on, we are now again dealing with the health dimension of pandemia. So this is the most disturbing issue. Then number 2, hot problems we are facing in our neighborhood. That's right. On Monday, I'm traveling to Luxembourg, and we'll be dealing with hot issues. I mean, literally hot, Nagorno-Karabakh and Belarus and southern neighborhood and the eastern Mediterranean, sort of traditional foreign policy stuff I'm dealing with. And occasionally when I wake up in the middle of the night, and these 2 are not enough, COVID and hot conflicts, then it's a broader picture in which I'm trying to embed my own country and to make sure that we can sustain all these challenges which are affecting directly this small country. So this is how my nights are.
When you talk about how COVID is hitting, it struck me last night when Bruno Le Mars was talking about this financial instrument that needed to pass. I think he said,
yeah.
I may have gotten, I think he said 750 billion euros. It was extraordinary sum. Whenever I hear this, and you sort of heard his comment that had that not happened in response to the economic duress of the times, that he didn't believe that the Eurozone would survive. How fragile is Europe in terms of, we keep hearing these things that we get to the precipice of real fracturing, of real stress and change, and yet the right things are done. Yeah. But I guess my question is, how often can Europe keep going up to the point of falling apart?
No, Europe will not fall apart. I mean, I'm absolutely certain. Europe will get over this. And I don't think it's just a, sort of diplomatic floskel, how do we say it? I don't know. Diplomatic language. That it could make us stronger at the end of the day. I really believe in that, because if you just extrapolate or go back into the last decade, we thought Europe would fall apart 10 years ago when we were in the middle of a Eurozone crisis. Some of you may remember it was Angela Merkel. She said we either save Euro or Europe as a whole or European Union will fall apart. It has not happened. Migration crisis, where we were so deeply divided politically, and we survived. We don't have solutions yet for all the problems we were facing, but I'm absolutely certain that we will manage this crisis as well. That, of course, does not mean that I naively overlook obvious problems that are on our table, internal divisions within European Union, unfinished business that has been on our table for so many years. and external challenges. But speaking on behalf of my country, there is no other alternative. And by the way, our American friends, they also should understand that for them to deal with Europe is to recognize that EU is not an experiment anymore. It's a well-established instrument that serves the interest of the West as a whole.
And do you think the United States realizes that? Recently, you made a proposal in a discussion with Assistant Secretary of State Phil Reker, in which you suggested that we needed that Europe needed a regular consultative mechanism, a dialogue with the secretaries of state and in the region with the U.S. Secretary of State. And Phil Reker shrugged it off and said, you know, we're really busy. We see you all anyway. I mean, he really tried to run away from your proposal. Has there been any progress? Have you pushed this any further?
Well, partly you have responded what you've asked at the beginning of a sentence, namely whether the US realizes what the EU is all about. I should be very diplomatic. But
Don't be.
I will not be. No, the US does not realize what European Union in political terms means for the continent. And I think it will take some time still to understand what it means for the United States as well. That's number one. You are right. You remember well because you've chaired the mission with Phil Reker. When I said that what we need most in order to restore, in a way, renew transatlantic relations is to start a kind of structured dialogue. What do I mean by that? I find it ridiculous that between the two closest allies of the free world, of the West, which is European Union and the United States, we do not have a dialogue where we regularly talk. So we had a meeting of foreign ministers, 27 foreign ministers with Secretary Pompeo, I think in August. I don't remember that anymore. But I don't know when we have the next meeting. I only know that we will meet at NATO, I mean, as a regular session, which is envisaged. But how come that, once again, European Union and United States are not able to regularly talk about important issues, and then we cannot be surprised that we see so many diverging views between the United States and European Union on so many important issues, be it in the Middle East, be it on Iran, be it on the role of international institutions, and you can name it. To make the long story short, I'm even adding something to what I have proposed with the structured dialogue. Before we get into it, we need to re-establish a elementary or basic trust between the United States and Europe, because once again, if I look back at the last 3.5 years, and 1.5 of that I've spent in the United States, we can talk about many issues where we disagree, but what has suffered most, I think, it's mutual trust. I'd like to see us in a year from now, let's say, back in a situation where we mutually see each other as a partner of first resort. So I'm adding to what I have proposed, let us talk first, something which is a precondition for that I have realized in between, restore trust. Because, you know, in recent years we've heard rough language.
I hear what you're saying. So in the United States, in a few weeks, we have a presidential election. We have no idea how it's going to come out. We could have people in the streets.
Accidents are happening regularly in democracies.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting time. But if President Trump is returned, and you know he gets another 4 years, you know, coming back to COVID for a moment, we saw the Trump administration, we saw Jared Kushner, we saw Peter Navarro tell large multinational corporations, don't send your supplies of PPE to your Europeans, bring them to the United States now. Lena Hallengren, the Swedish health minister, is very worried about an ongoing set waves of vaccine nationalism. So once a vaccine is set, and worried about, in particular, the United States and a kind of selfishness at a time when you've got to create priorities. So I guess in that world, since we're going to probably be struggling with COVID, you know, the vaccine issues come on, both from a Slovakian perspective but a European perspective, how can you restore trust in that sort of environment where there's such self-interest driving?
I mean, you're right. When reestablishing trust, I mean, it makes it even more difficult in these situations where we have this national race for, vaccines and all that, globally, by the way. But still, I think we cannot give up on what is strategically most important thing. And I've said that we are the closest partners. I hope we will not live in the world like this for too long. We'll overcome even this challenge. But you are right, it is adding to kind of mistrust, and unfortunately to misperceptions, very often misperceptions, which means that in some moments in the United States, I have had an impression, come on, how is it that we, European Union, or Europeans, could be seen as a foe or as an enemy, as a source of problems? The contrary is the truth. I mean, the world that is so important for us, for my small country, that was established after 1990, is threatened unless United States and Europe stay together, because what we are facing together is a challenge to the entire free community in the world. So pandemic cannot divide us even further. I am not ignoring what you're saying. What is obvious, that we have a national race who gets the vaccination first. And that's why European Union, again, and the Commission, I support it very much. I'm so glad that they are basically entering into contracts so that vaccine would be available then for our citizens in European Union. It's a good thing.
The other day you had a bilateral meeting with the Turkish foreign minister in Bratislava. Right. I read your tweets and you said the meeting was promising. What does promising mean?
Well, the promising, did I say that?
Yeah.
Okay. The meeting was interesting. No, it was, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu he is a great politician and diplomat, and first of all, I'm so happy that not only that I could meet him here, because I have had conversation earlier, but the mere fact that Turkish foreign minister is traveling to Bratislava, of course, to participate here, but to meet his Greek counterpart here in Bratislava, I think that already demonstrates the value of this platform. So it's not just blah blah here on the stage, but on the side. You haven't seen me here, but I've been working hard today from the morning and at Globsig in Bratislava. So, but straight to your question about with Mevlut Çavuşoğlu.
No. Promising, or is there progress being made?
Well, step by step, but still we are far from what we believe is the most important thing: to stop escalation between two allies, which is Greece and, NATO allies, which is Greece and Turkey. I mean, this is a huge problem, that we see ships, on a sea confronting each other, and this is something where diplomacy has to work. And I'd like to applaud German efforts, because they've been engaging with both sides of the conflict. But this must stop, because that is a problem problem on the ground, but also for the credibility of the alliance.
One of the other areas that Slovakia, the lane you swim in constantly, is your relationship with the Visegrad Four. How is that going? And have you made any progress in bringing Viktor Orban, in particular, over to a different side of things?
I don't think this is our role to tell the leaders of V4 what they should be doing. I know what Slovakia wants to do in V4, and let me say, Visegrad in our foreign policy will remain a pragmatic platform. I want that Visegrad serves the interests of both my country, and Visegrad brings solutions for Europe as a whole. I want that Visegrad is not perceived as something that is dividing Europe, but rather, when we are loudly speaking about some of the controversial issues, We are not speaking in a way that, once again, we are dividing Europe. So I think I know precisely what I want.
I think the
Visegrad
one thing,
to
I mean,
be.
just to be honest, from an outsider's perspective, looking at both NATO and Europe, the thing that comes up all the time, it comes up in GlobeSec conferences, it comes up, when Jens Stoltenberg was talking about the alliance, is the importance of values, that this isn't just a security alliance that's pragmatic. It's you're talking, and I didn't have enough time with him, but I said, look, is it lowest common denominator values, or is it a higher common? I mean, is the denominator and the level of values in the relationship rising or falling? And from an outside perspective, honestly, it's hard to tell. That when you look at what European nations are willing to tolerate among some of their members, and really a kind of shift to autocracy in some cases, illiberalism, and I guess the same thing in NATO when it comes to some of what we've been seeing with Turkey. So is that just false talk at this point, that they become pragmatic deals rather than value-based deals?
I mean, speaking about values can never be false talk. We see it these days, because without that we cannot provide security to our citizens. Without rule of law, there cannot be jobs in this country. So it's not something transcendental, it's not something theoretical. Rule of law is the very essence. We are what we are, Western democracies, because of rule of law. But we failed a little bit, or we were not able to explain that in an understandable language to the broad audiences. Once again, without independent judiciary, you cannot create jobs, because an investor, people from business here, the first thing when foreign investor, there is a head of a bank here.
Right.
The first thing when he asks himself, herself, whether he will invest money here or there is, do I have independent judiciary or not? So it's not, rule of law is not a theory. Number two, rule of law is not something that should divide us internally in European Union. It's a cement that brings us together. So I absolutely would oppose those who believe that this is a false talk. And now we are busy with other issues, with COVID and with global challenges. We will never ever be able to even cope with COVID unless we stick to the rules, because we are limiting freedom of our people these days. We are closing schools, we are proceeding to lockdown, but it has to be done constitutionally, because what is about us is constitution and law. We are all under that. So no. I think on the contrary, we need to talk about that, because that's the response of the Western world to the global pressure.
I want to go to everyone here, but I want to slip in one more quick question. One of the other geostrategic brews, storms that's brewing, I think, is a much deeper and much more serious U.S. standoff with China. And you're seeing the United States threaten its allies over things like Huawei. Last year at Tatra Summit, we talked a lot. I think it was called the 16+1 initiative, which was Orban and Hungary with the Chinese finance offering, cheap financing essentially to Eastern and Central European states. And so China was a big part of the discussions last year in Tatra Summit. Is that continuing? Do you have a worry that there's sort of an unfair squeeze that's going to happen, that the U.S. is going to put pressure on its allies without offering balancing financing or balancing financial support that the Chinese right now seem to be doing, both in infrastructure aid and whatnot?
Well, I think this confrontation is going to continue.
Yeah.
To what pleases me at this moment, that we Europeans have finally understood that, wait a minute, there is a rising power, China, and that it does pose at least a challenge to the liberal international order, that it is pursuing its interests very boldly.
Has it offered you any deals you can't refuse?
China?
Yeah.
No. I mean, the Chinese presence in Slovak economy is very limited at the end of the day. Two, I think United States is right reminding its allies that it matters, when you enter into commercial relationship in 5G, that it does matter. I think this is a serious issue. We pay attention to it in this country. But I think we should, it was good that the United States was insisting so much on us realizing more what China is, that the European Union has shifted. I mean, we see it more realistically, what kind of challenge China can pose. And therefore, the language that the European Union has agreed upon when describing what China is, it's rival, or I would say it's a partner, because indeed China is a partner. There are many issues on global scene where you have to cooperate with them. I absolutely am in favor of that. Number two, China is a competitor. Of course it is a competitor. Number three, it is a systemic rival, because there is a big difference, and the biggest difference, and that's how we organize our societies, how we view issues like rule of law, like individual liberties, and issues like human rights.
Right.
So there are obvious differences. And at the end of the day, we have to bear in mind that we are approaching the moment when the economically biggest and strongest country in the world will not be a democratic country.
Thank you. Let's open up questions. Yes, right over here. We'll do short questions, short answers, and try to get as many as we can.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Andrei Matashek, Dairy Pravda. So, Mr. Minister, what have you learned about the U.S. from almost 4 years of Trump's administration? And do you think that the U.S. democracy can survive another 4 years of Trump's administration?
So that's a question for my colleague here, the second part of it. We certainly are very curious about the choice of American citizens in the next elections. And I mean it seriously. It's not just to circumvent the answer to it. Whoever wins, the United States will remain a strategic partner for Slovakia. It's either President Trump who will stay, or President Biden. If he makes it, we'll cooperate with them. And the first part of the question is the 4 years of Trump, what that means, or what I've learned. I mean, first of all, rebalancing in the transatlantic relationship, especially in the area of defense and security, rebalancing is happening. And I think this is a merit of President Trump. You can see so many issues critically that he has been doing vis-a-vis European Union, but there is one merit, and that's that he made it really so clear to all allies that the way we've been contributing, or rather not contributing, to collective defense is over. And I was in the room in Brussels 2 years ago during the summit. He was really very eloquent on that. And what does that mean? In fact, unlike a few years ago, there is not a controversy anymore in Europe that we need to spend more for defense. Just 5 or 6 years ago, that was sort of, we've been trying to meddle through it and so on and so on. Now, nobody is questioning that amongst allies. Number three, we have learned during his administration what it means that an ally of us very often prefers unilateral approach to so many issues, and there is a clear big difference between administrations that we've seen before. Multilateralism is not something that would be such a favorite approach for his administration. Two, I believe. It is true that he managed to bring some dynamics in the Middle East recently, the normalizations of relations between Israel and United Arab Emirates and Oman, and I don't know what comes next. There is a movement. So with his style, which is so unique, but still I believe he managed to move something. So that's how I would see it at this moment. And I would like to, what I see critically, is his way of, you know, how he was treating European Union. I don't think that was good.
We can talk later about whether democracy survives or not, but I will tell you something. You know, we sit in a former, you know, territory controlled by the Soviet Union. The thing that I worry about in the United States today more than anything else, and I have to say I worry about it whether a Joe Biden comes in or not, is we are practicing behaviors that you folks here got rid of. You know, if you looked at China, you looked at the Soviet Union, you had political commissars essentially overseeing the functioning of government, overseeing what scientists said, overseeing what universities were allowed to say and do. We're experimenting with that now, and we see horrific things where, you know, a man named Michael Caputo, you know, no longer in job at the Health and Human Services Department, was essentially running by statements from scientists and saying these were undermining the message of the President of the United States. This kind of behavior is not necessarily a function of election. It is right now. I don't think it will automatically disappear if Joe Biden comes in, but it's the area that I think our country, my country, has the most work to do. But yes, right here.
Vladimir Bartovits, European Prague. I have a simple question. What are your expectations from the, if any, from the conference on the future of Europe? Should, for example, treaty change be a taboo or not? So if you can say a few words on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
You love that question.
I love it, but I would love even more if I knew, you know, when it all starts, because this has been around and announced, I don't know, 1 year ago, or I don't remember even, conference on future of Europe. I'm absolutely supportive of that idea, because we've been promising so often in recent years that we will respond properly to the recent decade of crisis, and we felt, I think that was the last nail into, not in a coffin, but the last nail, you know, with the Brexit. So the whole idea of a need to discuss urgently future of Europe has not come with the announcement of this conference. It has happened 2016 in September at the castle in Bratislava during our presidency. But from that point on, we have repeatedly been announcing big words that we are going to come up and tell our citizens what the future is. So I am ready, but at this moment as we speak, I have no idea what is the framework for that discussion. I am absolutely not the one who is ideologically or for ideological reasons excluding the need to change the treaty. Why shouldn't we change the treaty? Had somebody told you at the beginning of this year that we would be here and see that Europe could do more in terms of health protection, because we have no competence on European level. Now with COVID, many in March have criticized European Union for doing nothing. But institutions were right. We have no legal basis for that. So ideologically, I'm ready to open everything, but open with the view, or as a precondition for this opening should be, we know what we want to achieve, not just theoretically or intellectually engage ourselves in a discussion about nobody knows what. But I want to see precisely defined political objective, and then look into the treaties and say, well, here, this is an obstacle. This is an obstacle so that we can help our citizens in that or the other area. But in parallel, and that's my point as well, with the, along with the call for structured dialogue between US, even more, we need even more the discussion about what has been on our table as an unfinished job. Then we need a renewed discussion about transcendental imagination of Europe. What should EU be about? Unfinished job in Eurozone. For how long? There are bankers here. The Euro crisis started in 2008 or 9. Since then, we've made the progress, but a lot of work is ahead of us. The Eurozone is kind of half pregnant in a way, in that it is not complete. Migration, I mean, it's such a divisive issue still, and we don't have a recipe on which all can agree. a common foreign and security policy. So I believe we need, I may wrap up with that probably, we need a clear political vision and a political leadership. What we want to change in order to, for Europe to work better.
Well, Foreign Minister Ivan Korchok, thank you so much. I hope that you do get a little more sleep now and then, and that you're not awakened by terrible crises.
Anymore.
You know, you can feel free to put your mask on again now.
Thank you.
And thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I was asked to introduce someone here, so I'm going to do that. This is Vasil Hudak, Vice Chairman of Globsec. Bratislava, my friend, come in.
That's me.
Yeah, say something great.
I'll try. After a long night yesterday and some drinks, it's not that easy exercise, but anyway, I have this traditional role of providing some concluding remarks. Frankly, it's not easy because we had such a rich discussion, and I think we'll need not days, but weeks, maybe months to really go through these and digest all the information, discussions we had, and come up with some real conclusions. But let me give you at least my understanding and how I feel about this Tatra Summit. Well, first of all, we all know that we met in a very special situation, a situation created by the pandemic, by coronavirus. And I think the very fact that we were able to meet, that we are together in such a big group, that we are not just connecting via Zoom or video conferencing, this is already a big success. And I'm in favor of all digitization, etc., but it cannot replace a human contact and communication. And I'm really happy that we were able to do it. And I think it shows the resilience of Globsec and the whole event. And I'm really happy we were able to get together in this way, to keep the tradition of Tatra Summit to be the place where people meet, and maybe where even more happens in this informal, out of panels discussions, and this is something that we want to continue. Despite all the limitations on travel and on contacts, etc., we actually had quite interesting numbers. Let me give you some statistics. Altogether, we had at Tatra Summit 150 participants. I think it's a big success given the situation. 50% of the participants were from public sector, 50% from private sector representatives, which really represents, shows what we want to do. We want to have Tatra Summit as a real public-private exercise, and we were successful in this one. We had 26 speakers, 24 focus groups and kickoffers during those focus groups, and we had 12 countries coming here to High Tatra, and I think this is a big success with the current situation. Now about social media, because I think we have to understand that this is not only about what happens here, but there is much more happening in the cyber. Almost 3,000 views of live-streamed sessions until now. The discussion which was our online audience most engaged, it was the session on mobilizing private enterprise and investment. And I'm very proud that I was moderator of this session. And the most engaging speaker on the social media was Marian Bocek. Where is Marian? Yeah, congratulations. I don't know whether it's because of you or the smart battery which you presented, but anyway, this was obviously a big thing which got a lot of interest. So I think numbers show that event was successful. It brought a lot of attention from outside of these corridors of Kempinski Hotel. Now a little about the substance. You know that we created Tatra Summit as a place where the views, the perspectives from Central Eastern Europe should be created, communicated, and articulated. I think one issue which became very clear during our discussion is that the old model of economic growth, which was based on cheap labor, on cheap production assets, which drove FDI in 90s, early 2000s, this economic model is exhausted. We need to move towards a new model of economic development and growth in Central Eastern Europe, and there was a general agreement that this model has to be innovation-driven. Today we have an urgent situation because we have congruence of several elements. One is, as I mentioned, the non-sustainable economic growth, or model of economic growth. Secondly, we have climate change. We have the economic Green Deal, which can be the driver for energy transition and transformation, driver for new technologies like batteries, and it can really change the whole region. We have also pandemic, which will bring winners and losers in different sectors, and it's important that the region of Central Eastern Europe is among the winners in this exercise. And we have also a public pressure and expectation towards more focus on sustainable development, on responsibility, on inclusive development, and on solidarity. So what I would call, as a result of our discussions, a new model which comes to my mind, and I like these abbreviations, I would call it Green OD. Green OD means green, innovative, and digital. And I think this came across through different discussions, different sessions, but for me this Green OD, green, innovative, digital, is something that symbolizes where we have kind of agreed. Now, if this is the vision, the Green OD is the vision for the region, how do we get there? How do we transform Central Eastern Europe? It's very clear that one of the key elements of this transformation has to be public-private partnership. And we had excellent discussions, many interesting projects from energy to transport to digital were outlined, presented, and I believe that they also help to generate new ideas for recovery plans. But they, of course, require enabling environment from governments. And I think it's clear that the drivers of innovation have to be private sector companies, but government has to be the supporter of this process. Secondly, changing governance. This big transformation will not happen if the governance doesn't change. It means we have to get rid of corruption. We have to have public sector which is more dynamic, which is more open, and which communicates more with people and also with the private sector. And also, as Minister of Transport Doležal mentioned today, we are dealing with dual transition problem. On one hand, we have to still rebuild and fulfill the investment gap. It means we still do not have enough traditional infrastructure like roads, railways, etc., while developing new digital infrastructure for the future. We are probably lucky that we have huge amount of public funds. We have so-called EU Next Generation. We have billions and billions of euros available to the countries of Central Eastern Europe through revitalization and resilience fund and plans. Question, I think, is still open whether this is a blessing for the region or a misfortune. Because we know, and we have some examples in Europe, look at some countries in Europe where too much money available actually stops or slows down structural reforms. And it's clear that if we want to create a sustainable economic development model, we need reforms, structural reforms, which have to be supported by projects and by investments. Also, what became very clear during the discussion is that these reforms and these recovery plans have to be put into a regional, broader context. We had discussions about 3Cs initiative. It was wonderful to have representatives of the 3Cs initiative fund, about partnerships among companies in the broader region of Central Eastern Europe, and some initiatives which came out of this. I don't want to go into all different projects, but I think it became very clear that for these projects to happen, and we don't have much time, we know that the recovery plans are de facto very short in terms of the time horizons, but they need, for the implementation, and what was the clear message from private sector, they need clear priorities from the government, they need standards which are clear, understandable, and clearly communicated. And ideally, we need kind of template projects which are easy to execute, relatively simple, and which could be applied very quickly. So these were, I think, some of the messages from private sector. Now, we always want to have some tangible results from Tatra Summit. And I think we were very happy that after 2 years, when we launched the Slovak Battery Alliance here at Tatra Summit in 2008, that we had first battery from Inobat, and this was one of the clear clear tangible results also of this Tatra Summit, that we have actually now the product in our hands. I would say second such tangible result is that there was an agreement, at least in some discussion, to allocate a part of the recovery funds to equity funds. It is quite clear that what we will need, especially for small, medium enterprises and for corporations in the region, is going to be enough equity and capital, because there is enough liquidity but not enough capital and equity to support them. So such allocation to equity funds is very important. Also, it was agreed by some energy companies and relevant representatives of governments from Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Croatia to create a Central Europe clean energy platform. This is an initiative which would link actors in e-mobility, in creation of smart grids, but also new technologies like green hydrogen. And last but not least, also wonderful invitation initiative from the Minister of Transport that next Tatra Summit should not use planes, but actually a train from Bratislava to Poprad, which I think is wonderful. So this is, from my side, very briefly, what I think could be some of the results and conclusions from the Tatra Summit. Again, not all of those, I was just trying to capture maybe some ideas. But to finish, I would like to thank several partners who made this Tatra Summit possible. On the institutional side, it's Ministry of Finance of the Slovak Republic, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Slovak Republic, and Ivan, thank you so much. You really were, as you know, critical for this event to happen. And the European Investment Bank. On the corporate side, it's Slovenská šporiteľňa, Slovnaft, VUB, ZSE, and IPM Inobat. So thank you for being with us during this difficult time. But even more, I would like to thank all of you that you came here, that you stayed and were active during all the discussions. This is really something that we appreciate very much from the GlobSec side. And I would like to thank GlobSec people. Without them, this would not happen. They were wonderful under difficult circumstances, and I think they deserve an applaud from all of us. Thank you. And of course to Robert Vaš, because he actually was the one who was always keeping us focused on the event to happen, even if we had some doubts. And really thank you for the leadership and for persuading us that this should be done. So thank you all. Really appreciate that you came. Thank you for the time we had, excellent discussions, and looking forward to the next Tatra Summit next year. Thank you.
Sunlight, water, wind, pure energy within our grasp, which only exists in the very moment it is created. When it comes to